Welcome to my channel, where we give you practical tips and techniques to embrace high vibrational living as we move into the new consciousness. Today I have a special treat for you. We've got Andy Tomlinson again, giving a talk on personal energy management in high vibration energy. Andy Tomlinson is the founder and director of training for the Past Life Regression Academy. Today, he's going to talk about energy protection, energy clearing and grounding, and how to get the best out of your pendulum.
Just recapping exactly what we mean by our own personal energy. We have a physical body, which we all know, but that physical body is really just a dense form of energy. A little bit like an ice cube is a dense form of energy, and around an ice cube you have a vapor, the water vapor. And in a similar way around the physical body, we have an energy field around us, and some people are able to see it. These are psychics, but for most people it's at a level of vibration that we can't see with the naked eye, but nevertheless it is there, and it does have an effect on our health if we don't pay attention to it. So for example, if we're on an underground train or flying on a plane, anywhere where there's lots of people packed in close, then what can happen is if people have a different vibrational energy than our own, then they can drain energy from us. Likewise, if we meet someone who's feeling depressed, then they can drain energy from us. And when we're in the presence, there's just something that makes us feel different than normal, almost like we're starting to become depressed ourselves just by being with that type of person. So it's not that being depressed is something that is wrong in any way. It's simply that from an energetic point of view, we have to be very careful of our own energetic field and draining that can affect it. So there's various ways which we can go about protecting our energy field, and one way is just to be in a different place physically from people who could be a drain to our energy field, so that if there's certain relatives or people that used to be friends who are going through perhaps difficult times, emotional times, or they've got an illness, then we have to be just a little bit careful when we're in contact with them, that we do something about protecting our energy field and ensure that we can be there to be sympathetic and helpful for them, but not at the expense of draining our own energy. So some of the ways which we can go about protecting our energy field is we can carry crystals around us, such as smoky quartz, which act as a form of absorption of lower vibrational energies. But one of the best ways of doing it is to put energetic protection around us, and this is a particular technique that's been around for thousands of years, and I'm just going to talk to you about how the Incas used to do it, which is still as valid today as when those very energy sensitive people from the past did the same thing. And with this particular approach, then by intent we ask for energy to come down from the higher realms. You can use the word source or whatever word you feel comfortable with, and by intent ask for it to come down and place a bubble all the way around you for protection. Now remember, with energy work, your intent is really, really important. So bringing this energy down and even visualizing it is helpful, with the intent that it not only provides energy protection, but it allows higher vibrational energies to come through, such as advice from spirit guides and so on, and for you to be able to discharge any energy that you no longer need. So in other words, not so that it's not total protection, and you can allow energetic traffic to occur, which is in your highest interest. And then also drawing the energy from the earth and bring it up and form another bubble around with a similar sort of intention, for the energy to be protection for your energy field, and to allow energies for your highest good to come through, and for any energies that you no longer need can be discharged through it. So that's a very basic protection, and once that's in place, it should last for quite a time. A lot of people do find it's useful whenever they have a meditation to reinforce that particular protection, just to make it stronger, because there are times when, even with putting energy protection around us, it can be weakened if we're going through periods of stress, or some sort of emotional problem comes through and gets triggered, or we've got an illness or a disease, or we hurt ourselves. All these factors can weaken our energy field. So it is important that it's done on a regular basis, and it can be thought of a little bit like wearing a raincoat when you're going out and there's rain outside. Then you just put that raincoat on, and in a likewise manner, then you can choose to do that frequently or less frequently, whichever feels intuitively right for you. But it certainly needs to be done. And if in the past you've never felt that there's been a need to have protection, remember we're talking about moving to a higher vibrational state ourselves. And then when we do that, we're going to be much more prone to energy being drained from us, because it's more likely we're going to be meeting people with a different vibrational energy than ours. So something that may not be a problem in the past will be in the future, unless you take simple precautions of the sort that I talked about. There's another form of protection that you can consider as well, and that is that we were talking before about the energy field that we have around us, and there are several points that we refer to as chakra points, which are areas where the energy flows through as part of the circulation of energy around the energy body to give us the vitality that we need. And these energy points or chakras can be open or closed, and naturally they do it without us consciously being aware of it. For example, if we were out in a place of nature and we could just open up our arms and say, "Oh, isn't this place wonderful?" We just open up our chakras quite naturally. Or if we're in a situation where something's not quite right and we cross our arms and legs, that's also closing down our chakras. So, this thing happens quite naturally, the opening and closing of our chakras. And when our chakras are closed, it's like giving us an extra level of protection. And one way that you could do that is just by intent, asking for your chakras to be closed. Or you could just close down certain ones by intent, or you could visualize them almost like a lily leaf, opening and closing. But just a word of warning, if you close all of them down permanently, it's stifling the flow of energy around you, and eventually it will lead to ill health. So the idea is to keep your chakras open and only close them at times when you need to have extra protection. So if you're going on that trip on the plane, or a trip on a train where you're going to be sat next to people in close proximity, then your chakras and your energy protection are things that you can put around you to give you that extra protection. So we're going to move on to another area of energy management, and before we go into the details of that, I'd like to talk to you about a pendulum and how to get the best out of a pendulum, because a pendulum is a really important tool that can be used by people to tap into their higher wisdom and to seek a whole host of questions. We've talked on some of these other videos about selecting crystals to place around the garden or the house. Of course, a pendulum can be used for that. And a pendulum can be used for checking that our energy protection is sufficient. And there's a whole host of different ways in which the pendulum can be used. So I'm just going to go through some of the basics of it, because although it's quite a simple tool to use, it is very easy to misuse it. So the first thing is, I've got in my hand here a crystal pendulum, and there's no right or wrong about the sorts of crystals that you feel drawn to if you want to get a crystal pendulum. The thing to remember with a crystal pendulum is that they can pick up energies, so they will need to be cleared. So before I ever use a pendulum, I simply place the crystal pendulum in my hand and make the intent for energy to come from the higher levels. In my case, I'd probably use the word source, and down to my hand and clear the crystal energetically. Or you could put it underwater, both equally at work. But the important thing is making the intent of what you want the universe to do before you do it. There are two other sorts of pendulums you can have. There's wooden pendulums that don't require any form of cleaning, and there's also metal pendulums which are far less prone to picking up vibrations than crystal ones. But I think most people tend to have crystal ones, and as long as you remember to clean them before you use them, then they work just as fine as other pendulums. So that's the first step, is picking the pendulum that you want. If you've never used a pendulum before, then it's important to get a communication from your pendulum which is giving you a yes or a no. And some people have other things such as maybe and things of that nature. I think it's much easier to keep things nice and simple and just simply have a yes or a no. And the way to do this is that if you hold your pendulum, the length of chain that you hold it means if it's longer, the swing will be quite large. If it's shorter, it'll be quite quick and shorter. So it's getting the length that suits you. I'm just going to keep mine to a couple of inches. And then you make the intent for the pendulum to give you a yes. And the pendulum giving you a yes, and particularly if you ask for it to be yes, that is an indication that you can always use, so you don't have to keep repeating this. And in my case, the pendulum's giving me a back and forward movement to indicate yes. It could alternatively go from side to side, or it could go round in a circle clockwise or counterclockwise, or it could even be stationary. But I would encourage you to get a movement which is positive in one direction. Now, when you're doing this, you can either hold your pendulum stationary and allow your arm to be free, and when you make the intent of what you want, in this case to show me a yes, you'll find your pendulum will start to move. Now, the pendulum is moving because there's a subconscious signal coming down through to your hand without you consciously being aware, that's giving a very small movement. And it's almost like our body has become an antenna to the energies from the higher realms, and the pendulum just is a visual way to indicate that particular signal. So you could keep your pendulum stationary and then wait for it to start to move, Or some people like to put a little bit of circular motion in any direction and then make the intent. And particularly for the more heavy pendulums, this is a little easier because you'll find it'll give you an answer a little bit quicker rather than having to wait for a movement. And then once you've established a yes, you repeat exactly the same, but this time to indicate a no. Then once you've got your yes and a no, then you can ask a whole series of questions which have got an answer of yes or no. Now obviously if you ask a complex question where the answer could be yes or no, the pendulum isn't going to be able to answer it. So you could ask the question, is my energy protection sufficient? Or you could ask the question, is this crystal located in the right part of the house? So again, questions like that are open and you either get a yes or a no, and then based on that information you can then progressively move forward. Now when you are asking these questions, one thing that's really important is to still your mind. I remember I was teaching some students in Singapore about using a pendulum, and one of the students said, oh, I've just found out I'm pregnant, but I'd like to know whether it's a boy or girl. Could you all check with the pendulum, please? So all the students quite eagerly got the pendulums out, and I found that half of them got a yes and half of them got a no, which was quite discouraging when someone's just starting to get a pendulum to find that your colleagues are getting a different result. So as soon as the lady had left the room, I asked everybody to get the pendulums out again and to do the same, ask the same question. And this time, all of them got that it was a girl. And the lady who was pregnant wanted a boy, and she was putting out these thoughts, I hope it's a boy, I hope it's a boy. And those people with the pendulum who were closest to her were finding her thoughts were affecting the results of the pendulum. So the message here is when you ask the question, it really is important that you still your mind and wait for the pendulum to give you the result. If it's something that is personally very significant for you, such as, is it in my highest good to leave the job that I have at the moment? Then you may find there's an emotional connection you have to that, and that can very much affect the accuracy of your reading. So if there's something which is very significant for you, you may find in that case it's useful to get a colleague who's entirely neutral about the subject to do the reading for you. And of course, what the pendulum is doing is it's giving you an answer to something that exists right now. If you start trying to use it to find out what the lottery numbers are, I'm afraid that it just simply won't work, because there are some events in the future which aren't predictable, and the pendulum just has no way of giving you that type of information. So that's a pendulum. Some of the minor aspects you can consider when you are linking up with the pendulum is you can link up to the universal wisdom, i.e. source, which will be some vibrational level of source that you've got permission to tune into, or you could connect to your spirit guide, or you could connect to various spirits of light that you may be working with and to their consciousness. So you do have a number of options which could give you slightly different variations of the answer. Now, one thing with a pendulum that's really important is confidence. Occasionally you'll find that maybe you've asked a question that's not clear, or maybe it's a question which can be interpreted more than one way, and you may get a different answer than a colleague who asked the same question. So just accept that occasionally there may be something you haven't even spotted what it could be, But in most cases, if you get it confirmed by a colleague, you should both get exactly the same result, providing you're going through attending to all of the tips that I've been talking to you about to get the best out of a pendulum. And those people that do use a pendulum find they're getting really good consistent results, and they use it all the time for guidance. But remember, it is just a form of guidance. Some people like to use a gut feeling, or some people may tune into a spirit guide and listen to information from a spirit guide. These are all different ways of tuning in intuitively, but a pendulum is a very powerful way to do that. So what I'm going to move on to now is another aspect of clearing the energy field that I was talking about before, where we can use a pendulum in a very helpful way. And I'm going to talk to you about spirit attachments. This is the discarnate energy of someone who's died that hasn't moved on to the light. If it's in a building, it's referred to as a ghost. If it attaches itself to a person, people refer to it as a spirit attachment. And it can be quite unhealthy for a person if they have a spirit attachment. And for example, I was doing a demonstration for a group of people, and I was intending to go into a past life, and then all of a sudden discovered that there was a spirit attachment with the person I was working with. And it turned out to be the deceased husband of the lady I was working with. He died 6 months before and had stayed with his wife in a loving, helpful way, or so the spirit attachment thought. And whenever she was trying to form a new relationship, he was whispering in her ear, "No, he's not good enough, he's not good enough." And that wasn't really helpful because she wasn't able to get on with her life. So I enabled the lady to get into an emotional dialogue with the spirit of her husband. And once they'd said their farewells, then the spirit attachment went on its way to the light and enabled that lady then to get on with her life in a meaningful way. And sometimes spirit attachments come down, and a little bit like meeting a person who's feeling depressed, they can draw energy out of us, and it's quite unhealthy to have spirit attachments in our energy field. Sometimes they can be at the edge of the energy field where their impact is slightly less. Sometimes if someone is going through an operation or going through a big emotional problem, then the spirit attachment kind of goes deep inside the energy field, and it's a little bit harder to remove. I'm going to talk about how to clear spirit attachments from the edge of the energy field. And again, if this is something that you're new to, you may want to do it with a colleague, so your colleague can double check the answers you get with a pendulum. And then using your pendulum and the yes/no answers, you can ask the question, do I have a spirit attachment? And if you're working with a colleague, they can double check. And if the answer is yes, you can ask your spirit guide to take that spirit attachment away, to take it to the light and allow it to go on the journey. And then check with us the pendulum that the energy has left and that there aren't any more energies in there. Occasionally you may find an energy deep in the energy field where the spirit attachment is reluctant to leave for some reason or another, and some sort of dialogue is needed for it to move on the way. And that's really where a therapist that's been trained in this area can be quite helpful to move on and clear those energies. And of course, once the energies have been removed by intent, it's useful to bring down healing energy. It's almost like when these energies have been removed from the energy field, even if it's on the edge, is a little bit like cheese with those holes in it, and those holes are holes in our energy field. So just by intent, bringing down healing energy is quite useful. So you could say something like, I just like energy to come down from the higher realms, and just imagine it like a waterfall, and just make the intent for the energy just to flow all over and through the whole of your body, just recharging your energy field and washing away any remnants that are no longer needed. And with energy work, often it's remarkably quick and simple as long as you make the right intent. So we've talked about protection of our energy field. We've talked about opening and closing the chakras. We've talked about how it's useful to have a pendulum that can help, and how you can clear spirit attachments from you. The last thing I'd really like to talk to you about in terms of energy management is about grounding. And grounding is about being both physically and energetically connected. So for example, what I mean by energetically connected is it's very easy when people are moving into the higher vibrational levels, and they may start communicating with all sorts of beings of light. Well, sometimes there can be spirit guides that can, there can be spirit attachments that masquerade as guides. And it really is important that you know that when you are connecting with a spirit guide, that it is actually that you're communicating with. And one of the ways is a spirit guide will never tell you to do anything. It will always wait until you ask for information, and then it will give guidance. So if someone's communicating with what they appear to be a spirit guide, and it starts telling them to do something, it's probably not likely to be a spirit guide. In this case, just check yourself with your pendulum, get a colleague to check. And this checking with a colleague is a good way to energetically ground ourselves that what we think is happening is in fact the reality of what other people can check and find as well. And another aspect of grounding is about the physical grounding of our body, and particularly if we've been doing a long meditation or any sort of high vibrational work that involves us being slightly floaty, is to make sure we're well and truly back in the body after it. And this can be as simple as just tapping our feet. It can be having a drink, having a sweet or a chocolate. And there is something called Cook's hookup. And to do that, you put your hands together like that, up over like that, which just creates some tension between the fingers. Cross your legs over each other, and then just focus on the physical sensation for a little while, and that will bring you well and truly back into your body. Simple grounding techniques, but they're very, very important to do. So that's a summary of some tips for energy management. And do remember, as your vibrations are raising and you're moving into the new consciousness, then being aware of your energies and energy management becomes more and more important.
Thank you, Andy, for such a fascinating video. If you would like to get more tips and techniques to embrace high vibrational living as we move and live in the new consciousness, feel free to subscribe to my channel down below. And I'll see you next time.